Sequels and remakes are the bane of every horror fan's existence. Yes, sometimes they can be a bit of fun, sometimes they can even be genuinely quite good, but this is such a rare occurrence that mostly franchises consist of one solid original and a million awful follow-ups. So I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are 9 horror movie franchises that should have stopped at one film. 9. VHS. VHS is a wacky adventure. Released at the tail end of the found footage boom in 2013, VHS is an anthology film that focuses on various different horror tales all woven together with one overarching narrative. It proved surprisingly effective, however the sequels were subpar to say the least. VHS 2 veered too far into the fantastical, and while it did implement some clever ideas such as the GoPro zombie story, the overall film felt like a cluster bomb of nonsense. The third installment in the series took the film viral, and it ultimately fell completely flat. Neither of these sequels lived up to the hype brought on by the first film. It was such a clever idea to have horror filmmakers like Adam Wingard and David Bruckner direct horror shorts and then stitch them together into one spooky package. Unfortunately, the idea just didn't have legs, and the gimmick ran its course very quickly. 8. Sinister. An overlooked film to begin with, it's very hard to recall that Sinister actually got a sequel. Directed by Scott Derrickson, the original film was a masterclass in horror. He created a fairly unique way to tell his story, using old tapes to depict grisly murders. Sinister 2 is a simple carbon copy of the original, just without the finesse. Released in 2015, Sinister 2 used the exact same tropes as its predecessor. A family move into a new house and discover some tapes, all of which depict murders, and then they're terrorized by the exact same villain. Essentially, you've seen this film before. What makes this entry hurt even more is that the original is now a cult classic. It has genuine scares, an intriguing plot, everything that the sequel is lacking. As far as horror franchises go, Sinister was a one and done. Sinister 2 never happened. Let's just say it never happened, okay? 7. The Strangers. There's always bated breath from any horror fan when a sequel's delayed again and again. You know it's not a good sign. Released 10 years after the original, The Strangers Prey at Night saw the infamous strangers terrorize a new group of people, this time in a trailer park. The original film is one of the best invasion thrillers ever put to screen, but all of that is lost in this generic sequel. Prey at Night doesn't have the grit and realism that the original did. The key to the original is that it all felt very relatable. The fear of being alone at night in your home is key to its fear factor. All of this is absent in the sequel. Instead, it just feels like another basic, bog-standard slasher film. 6. The Blair Witch Project. The Blair Witch Project remains one of the pillars of the horror genre. Without this film, there'd be no Paranormal Activity, no found footage boom. So how did the sequels fare? Not very well. The second film in the series, Book of Shadows, was a bizarre mix of meta-commentary and a heavy focus on the lore of the first film. Throw in some studio meddling and you have a disappointing follow-up to an original hit. In 2016, a sequel simply entitled Blair Witch was released. The film was supposed to recapture the magic of the original and served as a direct continuation of the story. However, the film was hit with mixed reviews and very vocal backlash from the fanbase, as it broke the one rule of any Blair Witch film, which is do not show the witch. Thankfully, horror fans still have the original. The Blair Witch Project still holds up over 20 years after its initial release, and whilst the other films in the franchise don't hold up, at least the Blair Witch has found success in other mediums, such as the 2019 survival horror game. 5. The Purge. On paper, The Purge should work incredibly well as a franchise. The concept is excellent. There's one night a year in which all crime is legal. People get to let off steam by carrying out heinous acts that otherwise would see them imprisoned for life. It's a great idea. I mean, for a film, don't let the government get any ideas. The overall franchise has seen diminishing returns ever since the first installment though. Each of the sequels had good intentions. They furthered the lore and explored different aspects of society within this event. The issue is that the films are incredibly heavy-handed with their messaging, and they essentially distance themselves from the horror genre. The second film turned into an action vehicle for Frank Grillo, and the third and fourth films lack any sort of substance, instead opting to deliver some lackluster social commentary. The original Purge film knew what it was. It was a home invasion film built around a cool, wider concept. However, in the expanding world, The Purge has shown that bigger isn't always better. 4. A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place was a beautiful film, directed by and starring John Krasinski. A Quiet Place centers around an alien invasion in which the predators hunt via the slightest of sounds. It's a great concept and a great movie, however its sequel didn't quite live up to the original. The main issue with A Quiet Place Part 2 is that it just feels unnecessary. Like a lot of other films on this list, the movie focuses on opening up and developing the lore of the franchise, rather than being actually a worthwhile story. The first film ended perfectly, having the Abbott family finally learn how to fend off the threat, and closing with an excellent ending shot. In the sequel, the addition of Cillian Murphy also feels like an afterthought. He doesn't add a lot to the story or the characters, he only moves the plot forward from location to location, and the heart of the first film, Evelyn Abbott, is out of action for a large portion. If left untouched, A Quiet Place would have been one of the most inventive standalone horror films of recent years. Sadly, fans have had to put up with the strange, plodding epilogue that is A Quiet Place Part 2. 3. The Woman in Black. Oh, you didn't know this movie had a sequel? Well, neither did I, and there is a reason for that. Easily the most forgettable horror sequel that exists, The Woman in Black, The Angel of Death takes place 30 years after the original, seeing the Ilmarsh house occupied by a group of evacuees during World War II. Whilst the first Woman in Black was a faithful adaptation of Susan Hill's novel, the sequel does very little to retain that style. It follows a cut-and-paste formula from most horror films at the time, and relies way too heavily on jump scares. There's no build-up, no enjoyable payoffs, and it's just pretty much white noise. Whilst the acting is serviceable, none of the characters make a lasting impact. It would have been more interesting if the film explored the ramification of Arthur Kip's death in the first movie, as after all, the film did leave audiences with a mild cliffhanger. The Woman in Black, The Angel of Death is everything a horror sequel shouldn't be. Boring, drawn out, and repetitive. The fact that a third film never made it to cinemas is a damning indictment of how poor this outing was. 2. Psycho. Most of the time, a classic should just be left untouched, and Psycho is as classic gets. Released 20 years after the original, Psycho 2 picks up with Norman Bates being released from the mental institution he was incarcerated in, ultimately undermining the entire ending of the original. The latter sequels lose focus as well, opting to humanize Norman Bates, which in itself isn't a bad idea, it's just that the execution isn't all there. There's one big issue with the Psycho franchise, and that is that the original was just too good. Everything that follows will inevitably fail to live up against a film that was so beloved and so revolutionary. Every sequel will be held against its predecessor, and unfortunately, none of the sequels were directed by Alfred Hitchcock. 1. Jaws. Oh, shark movies, where do we begin? Looking at the list of shark-related films like 47 Meters Down, Sharknado, and the Jaws franchise, it's safe to say that there has never been a good shark sequel. Specifically looking at Jaws, every sequel gets sillier and sillier as the series goes on. The films start to revolve more and more around the kills, and they lose focus of what made Jaws such a classic. One of the reasons that Jaws is held up as such a classic is that the characters were phenomenal. Chief Brody, Quinn, and Cooper are all terrific, and it's their moments together that make the film what it is. When the trio are getting to know each other on the Orca, it's so effective in establishing those characters as likeable, and the same cannot be said for any of the sequels. Jaws 2, Jaws 3, and Jaws the Revenge have ridiculous story choices that make the films border on parody. The fact that in Jaws the Revenge, a shark seeks revenge on the Brody family just shows how this franchise literally jumped the shark. And on that note, we've reached the end of this list of 9 horror movie franchises that should have stopped at one film. If you can think of any more, then let us know in the comments down below. And remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. As always, I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.